Howdy folks, we're looking at Edge Magazine issue 36, looking at the future of interactive entertainment, as always. And this time it's September 1996. So we have the Saturn, PlayStation, and the Nintendo 64 all released at the time. And what does Edge have on its cover for such exciting times? Well, looks like a chip of sorts. The main article is the future of data storage. That doesn't sound very exciting, does it? Well, my girlfriend thought it was exciting, and she thought the cover looked pretty cool too. I don't know. I don't think it has that much personality, but she studied art in college, so I guess she knows better than I do. And yeah, we have Mitsuguchi. Apparently, I think he's from Sega, and Criterion, the British company, being apparently exposed. They're not that interesting, though, I think. So, some talk in the opening column about, let's see, yeah, of course, the costs of making things on cartridge, and that things might be different in the future. With people talking about DVD, but also the fact that silicon keeps getting cheaper. Cutting edge information is, well, no news on the European strategy for releasing the Nintendo 64. I think it wouldn't be released until early or midnight 1997. And let's see, it's a bit dark here in my room. Now here's a list of the Nintendo 64 games being released. I don't know if it can sharpen up or not. We see titles like Rave Race 64, Empire, don't know that one. Star Wars, Shadows of the Empire, of course. Blast Corps, that's a big one. And some games we don't know very well, like Buggy Boogie and what do we have here? Tetris Fire? I don't know those games. So the prices of the Saturn and PlayStation lowering because of Nintendo 64 being released at the time, $200 and $250 for the Nintendo 64. And this Tom Kalinske, I've never heard of him before. He apparently left Sega, working for Sega of America, so that could be a bad sign for Sega, and indeed it was the case. And this is interesting. The Quake version of now, the Quake for PC was already being pirated. Also, there already was a converter found to convert Nintendo 64 games into other cartridges. So, I've never seen a pirated Nintendo 64 game, though. Videologic working with Intel for more graphics for the PC. And here we have yet another AM team. What's the name again? So, not AM3, but a new, I can't seem to find the name. AM Annex, that's what it is. And they do it on to make some other games, but I don't think any of them are that very interesting, like Sega Touring Car. Very young kid being interviewed. He doesn't have that much interesting to say, though. He just likes video games. He's got to be working on them. The first hints of classic games being re-released for the PlayStation for a cheaper price, and they were indeed very cheap. I think $60. No, I think $40 or $30 for a new version. TVML, never heard of that before. Is apparently another language. This one mostly used for gaming over the internet, but I don't think that was a very big success. Yes, here is Tom Kalinske, who worked for Sega, and at the time he still did, and he has a lot of faith in the Sega Saturn. With, for example, its ability to go onto the internet. I've never seen somebody do that, but he thinks that'll give the Saturn an edge. Let's see, anything else he writes about? He's very proud of Knights, of course, looking great. Here's a game called Blade. I don't think it was actually released, but Edge likens it to Quake. It does seem to have rather impressive graphics. So let's keep an eye out for this game called Blade. It seems to have a Conan the Barbarian kind of main character. Soviet Strike, a PlayStation conversion of the 16-bit series. Didn't go on to sell as well, I think. Turok did sell very well, and Edge is quite impressed by what they see, noting that it's more of an adventure game than the constant quarter shooting of Quake and Doom. Theme Hospital by Bullfrog, another colorful and funny sim game. That would be a mild hit for the PC. I think it was also released on the PlayStation. Assault Suits Linus 2. A sequel to I think it was, oh God, what was it again? Cybernator? So 2D action with sluggish mechs. I've never liked this genre that much. This being released for the Saturn, and it looks kind of like a 16-bit game, but with more colors. Here's Spider. I don't think that was ever released. Made by Boss Game Studios. Getting 2 pages though. Little Big Adventure 2, not quite the hit that the original was, with a new engine, so you can actually turn the camera around when you're outside. Still, I believe it was rather hard to control, but then people weren't that fascinated by having an action RPG, action adventure game on the computer, so it wasn't a big hit. StarCraft, though, was a huge hit. This is 1996, so the game wouldn't be released for another 2 years. And Edge mentions how there are a lot of FMV sections, and that there will be 3 different armies to choose. Blue Ice, what's this about? Looks like some kind of puzzle game with a lot of cinematics. To be released for probably the PC, yes, and also the Mac. Don't know much about the game though. Tarumaru. Let's see, this is kind of like Shinobi, Edge says. To be released for the Saturn. I don't know if it was any good. Top Gear Rally was one of the better third-party games for the Nintendo 64, but still nowhere as good as Sega Rally. Blade and Barrel, I don't think that was actually released. It's a flight sim game for Nintendo 64. So here's Criterion Studios. So what do? They work on 3D graphics. This is a very interesting picture of the studio itself. I bet these 3 are part of the studio. I don't know if the rest are. And Criterion apparently has a knack for taking exciting pictures of the team, because they have another picture of them underwater here. And we see some games like Subculture and Scorched Planet, which used Criterion's graphic capabilities. Here we have, I guess it's the same game. Scorched Planet, yes. So here's the big article, and it's about memory, how to store it. At the time, CDs were a big thing, having up to about 600 megabytes of data, which was way more than anything you could get on cartridge. The biggest Neo Geo games were, I think, around 300 megabytes, and they were very expensive. But things were to change in time. As we now speak, we use SD cartridges and what do you call them? USB sticks to hold our information, not CDs and DVDs, because as this graph shows us, around 2004, that's where the silicone would be cheaper than the use of plastic or optical storage, like discs. And that is what more or less kind of happened. So this is a pretty good preview of 1996. Games on the DS and even the PS Vita, they are, of course, they are discs. We store most of our games now on our hard drives for the games. I mean, you can now buy games, and they are on a CD. So I guess for certain games, it's still. I mean, for certain tech, it's still good to use optical storage. But no, cartridges are fine, and they're doing very well in 2017. And I don't recall Nintendo 64 games being all that expensive, but they did go for the optical drive of the GameCube. So here are the reviews. First there's Zed, not to be called Z, because this is a British game made by the legendary Bitmap brothers, who have made a lot of fantastic titles for the Amiga. And Zed was a real-time strategy game. I don't think you could collect any resources, so the focus is more on combat. And fights were nice and short, but it didn't seem to have the depth of Command and Conquer, so it didn't do that well. It also had the graphics of an Amiga. Edge gives it an 8. It's a fine product, lots of personality. Unfortunately, the last game made by the Bitmap brothers, which was good. Nights into Dreams also gets an 8. Yeah, a roller coaster of a platforming game, lots of color. You should try it out. It's hard to explain what it's really about. Most of the levels are... there's not that much exploring to do in the levels. It's mostly about getting the high score. Die Hard Trilogy, which is 3 games in one. The first one is kind of crap. The third-person shooting game, which is based on the first Die Hard movie. The second one is fairly okay, with which is a lot like Virtual Cop, shooting at people. But it's a third one that most people loved, and that's the taxi game, where you drive really fast through, I believe it's San Francisco, try to avoid people. And a lot of people had fun playing that part of the game. And Edge gives it a 7. It's only for the PlayStation, not to be confused with Die Hard Arcade, which was for the Saturn. Decathlete was Saturn's answer to International Track and Field, and it has sillier characters. Edge gives it an 8 out of 10, just like the PlayStation variant. Time Commando was made by the same people who made Little Big Adventure, and it has very awkward controls, but otherwise quite an ambitious title, even though they wanted to release it within a year. Time hasn't been very good for this game, because now the graphics are quite obsolete, but at the time it looked very pretty and made good use of the CD-ROM technology. Formula 1 was a huge seller for the PlayStation 1, and was it made by Codemasters? No, by Psygnosis. And yeah, they really knew how the PlayStation worked for racing games, considering their work, Destruction Derby and Wipeout. And this one was more of an arcadey kind of game, and people loved it. So, on to new media. What kind of books do we have? Gridiron, Showstopper, the comic of X-Files. I don't think any of them are really that good. Eve is an interesting product. It's made by Peter Gabriel, and it's an interactive CD where you could actually put different pieces of music together, apparently, and they're very weird looking, surrealistic full motion video parts. It was quite expensive to make, apparently, and I don't know if Peter Gabriel made any other of this kind of projects. Music, well, there's the Ridge Racer CD, which remixes the music. I don't know, volume 16 of Various. It's not helping much, is it? We have virtual eyeglasses for $600 to $800. Well, good luck selling that. The Interactor, which has vibrations before the Rumble Pack. Some kind of competition for winning a Microsoft Starter Kit. The question is, what British newspaper did Microsoft pay to be distributed free on the day Windows 95 was launched? I don't know. Race Storm, a 2D side-scrolling shooting game, although it did have 3D graphics. I don't know if it was ever released for a console. These are the arcade games, by the way. Bubble Memories, a latest version of Bubble Bobble. don't think it had a very big following. And Dynamite Kaiji, I think it's a beat 'em up, and that wasn't that very impressive. I think it was made by AM3. Does it say so? AM1 actually. So, as for Retro Review, we see Namco releasing their third volume of arcade hits. They sure had a lot of games in the 80s, which conquered the arcades. And a Retro Review of Rebel Star, a strategy game for the ZX Spectrum, was apparently quite easy, but that made it very friendly for the user, and you could play it against another person. So I don't think it was real-time, I think it was turn-based. And the computer was also interesting to play against. So lots of praise for this game, and later on we will see it discussed again in Edge with I believe it was a time extended, maybe a making of. But for spec owners, it was a classic. So we're nearing the end. Wow, lots of advertisements for companies. Here we have the letters. Now, it's been a while since I've read this issue. I'm already working on the next because I haven't had that much time to film. But this person says the 32-bit systems have been breaking new ground, but Edge doesn't totally agree. One person says, yeah, we got to make a new version of the Sentinel because that was classic gaming. Imagine that. Well, his wishes would be answered because Sentinel Returns would be released in a year or two for the PlayStation 1 with very atmospheric graphics. And, yeah. So that's quite a coincidence. Another person saying that the Amiga is the future for gaming PCs. Well, no, it isn't. And even though I have to agree, the PC, personal computer based on x86 architecture is a mess. And we're still living that legacy, but oh well, that's just the way capitalism works, right? So, and what's this? 2D titles such as Yoshi's Island beat 3D games hollow, so why bother, argues Jane Francis. Well, I've been asking the same thing for years. Why bother to make 3D games when 2D they're better? And most indie devs would agree. And some talk about 50, 60 hertz, 3D accelerators for the PC, whatever. Instead of a preview, we have a quick look at some kind of party, which was at a racing a racing course. Who held this? Psygnosis, maybe? No, Electronic Arts. So Edge was at some kind of party. It seems like to be some kind of fetish party. This guy carrying things, and well, Edge got to play some video games there, and yeah, that's how games were promoted back in the 90s. Some spilled beans, and that was Edge Magazine 36. So no preview for next time. But next time will be about artificial life, close to artificial intelligence. And I hope you enjoyed this version of Edge, even though it's dull color and not so very interesting. Articles in the middle. But hey, Nights into Dreams was reviewed, so that's at least worth looking into this. Hope to see you next time.